Hello and welcome to the Just Disciples podcast. Look around and you'll see the struggles, poverty, inequality, and deep division. Look inside and you'll find the hope, the call to love, and the longing for shalom, a comprehensive peace. Just Disciples is a gentle but firm invitation to live a unified life. We explore what it means to allow our spiritual journey to inform our public life, and how the fight for justice deepens our understanding of faith itself. Join us as we explore the theology and the reality of living life at the intersection of faith and justice.
For the season of Advent, we'll be providing a series of weekly podcasts that will follow the traditional liturgical themes of the season: hope, peace, joy, and love, but in a slightly different order. Our first episode in the series will deal with the theme of love, specifically transformative love. I'm excited to have Reverend Dr. Dion Boyce and Reverend Dr. Chris Wilson here with me today to explore this topic. And thanks to both of you for being here today and our first official episode of the Just Disciples podcast series. And just how are you both doing today?
I'm doing great, wonderful, awesome. Loving this, I think, fall kind of coming in here. So I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent.
I'm also excited to join and be a part of the conversation today, and looking forward to see how this podcast materializes going forward.
Again, I really appreciate you both being a part of this and contributing. So let's jump into the topic for today. Jesus identified the greatest commandments as loving God and loving your neighbor. And what would you say are the specific cultural, political, and institutional challenges in our current time and place that make living out both of these commandments very difficult?
Well, right now, what I think would be some of the challenge, a big part of the challenge is cultural challenges, differences, different cultural understandings of what that means to love God and our neighbor, and how we see or who we see as our neighbor. So I think when we look at it from a cultural lens, who is my neighbor? What does that mean? And what did Jesus actually mean by that? So we question that, and I find that to be a challenge in the areas of ministry that I embark on. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think is a real challenge is, especially in our U.S. culture today, in some ways I think religion, at least our religious beliefs, take a backseat to culture, politics, and institution. And we sometimes let those drive decision-making before we allow our faith values to come out in some way. And so if there are different culture pieces or even on the political divide and people choose a side, we're forced to this binary thinking of politicalness in our culture. And so when it comes to love, and just think of I'll just think of LGBTQ plus support. You end up taking a political angle on it versus a faith-based piece. Then love gets the back seat, and they couch it with love, but it's really not faith-based love. It's cultural biased, institution biased, political biased versions of love, and it diminishes the words that Jesus speaks when he says, love your neighbor as yourself. I think that's some of the challenges.
Exactly.
So
I agree.
It's always been a problem where people want to cherry pick verses and use them for their own agenda. Right. But it feels like it's worse today than it's been in my lifetime. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
My lifetime, I would agree. I've never seen as much a divide. And then I don't know if that has to do with me being a pastor and seeing it from that space, but it is a huge divide. And like Reverend Dr. Chris said, within the LGBTQ plus community, it's just right now, It's at the height that I've ever seen it. We hear it and see, and people protest and do different things against LGBTQ. But when there's leadership calling for the division of said people and groups, people follow that type of political leadership, and so I think it's just exacerbated tremendously right now, and I've not witnessed or experienced it, and it makes it difficult for me as an LGBTQ pastor to lead and for people to trust and hear that God still speaks. So yeah, it's pretty bad right now, from what I can tell.
I think the other thing that contributes to that, and we've seen this at least in the last 8 to 10 years, is that from the top down, at least in the political sphere, this kind of open permission to have bully behavior, and that be a condoned behavior, coupled with what had been, you thought, in the 60s of some progress around civil rights, around people, and what we thought we were making progress, and then we have the election of a black president, and then a huge kind of like recoil of all this racial LGBTQ progress what they're making. There'd been this underground not really wanting it to happen, and all of a sudden it becomes really visible in culture and in politics of what people had not been saying, but they've been thinking and believing, and has created this gigantic wedge. And because we've been unwilling for so long, we've, in family systems or whatever, we say, well, don't talk about politics and religion because it's divisive. Well, what we're left with is this chasm of decades of not talking about religion and politics. So we've now got people on the far ends of the spectrum with how do we even engage in civil conversation around difficult things when we've said those are off limits to talk about at family settings or with your friends because you don't want to upset somebody. So we're left with a really difficult context. And so it's left us in a really hard place, not that we can go back in history and say, these were really hard times, these are hard times, but we've given kind of full permission for kind of this bullying of people, and it's okay because politically top figures behave in a bully way, so I guess we can do it too. So we've kind of been given this cultural permission to be mean, which is counter to what the gospel says we're supposed to be with other people. So get off my soapbox a little bit.
No, that's what it's all about, being on a soapbox. Well, the more I look at these issues, they're wide and varied as far as their focal point, but yet it seems like underneath all of it is this fear that for somebody other than my group, my tribe, to gain, I have to give up something. And we have political leaders and even church leaders who are fanning that fear and growing hatred out of it as a result. And it really disappoints me that we give in to that fear so easily.
Fear of loss.
Yes, yeah.
We're going to lose, yes.
Yeah, it's much like back in my seminary days, we studied first century Palestinian culture, and one of the things there was a limited good perspective on the world. And I think we've got that same perspective today, that there's only a limited amount of good and valuable things to go around, including just our identity. And people are so afraid that they're gonna lose that it allows them to feel justified in being cruel to anybody that's different than them, yes, because they're seen as the enemy, not as just somebody who's different. Well, quite a while back, I read this book by Rick Rouse and Paul Ingram called "The World is About to Turn." And in that book, they advocate for a shift from a belief-centered Christian paradigm to a transformation-centered faith. And, of course, a part of that is love. And so how does the practice of love enable this transformation, and how does this transformation-centered love differ from love as understood within the historical belief-centered framework?
I think one of the words you just used is important, and it is the practice of love. When we talk about, I believe, when we talk about belief-centered, we hear, or we might be taught, or we might believe in what the doctrine or scripture says. We know what it says, but do we live that experience? Do we practice that love, which is that transformational? That's what transforms, is when we actually put our hands on it and do something with it. And so I think shifting, but helping people understand what that shift means, because it kind of goes back to what you just said, the fear of loss. You want me to lose what I believe? Do you want me to change what I believe? No, we want you to practice what you believe. And so I think that transformational belief, that transformational practice is so important right now. People need to see, feel, hear, be able to touch the beliefs of Christ, the teachings of Christ, and that to be the center of what ministry looks like and how we move forward in this world now. We have to be doers of the word, I believe.
Yeah. Amen.
I think that's true. I think one of the, go back to the kind of dipping back into church history a little bit. We go back to the 300s to 500s of the Common Era, and we had the area where we had all the councils that made decisions about right belief. And Constantine was trying to control the Roman Empire and not have division, and so he called all these councils together. He wanted harmony within Christianity because he had declared Christianity the state religion, and so it all became about the right belief, and rather than paying attention to relationships. And I think Christianity took a wrong turn in some ways from that time period, that Christianity became what I would call transactional versus relational. Yeah. And so in U.S. Christianity, we have this, it's not really embedded in what I would call the biblical narrative is about communal identity. There was never like me, myself, and I. It was always, how do I think of myself in the midst of community? And U.S. Christianity really centers itself on personal salvation, personal journey, personal beliefs, all this stuff. And we don't think in a communal ethic the way the biblical narrative is set up. And so one of the questions, and St. Andrew's heard me say this before, whenever my life comes to a close, I would rather God look at me and say, you were too loving, rather than having been right about stuff. I'd rather God say, well, Chris, I'm not sure we can let you in because you've been over the top loving here. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'd much rather my mistake be that I was more than generous with whatever definition of love I want to claim. That is meant to be, at least in Paul's definition of agape love, is no conditions. It's not, I'll love you if I love you, period. I mean, it's like a ... There's no disclaimer on that. And I think Rouse is getting that. It's kind of a similar thing of what he's talking about, is this idea of transformation. It's getting me on beyond being right versus just being loving. And I think if we're loving, it will all sort its way out in the end. And we can't put controls on whatever that love means. We just have to generally love people that are like me, people that are not like me. And I will be changed in that loving dynamic by having invested my life, by being vulnerable with another person, being as loving as I can be. The goal is not to change others, it's myself being transformed in that process, and then community is strengthened in that. Yeah. So,
one thing I remember in my social work studies, and I never thought about it, but it carries with me through my ministry. I was taught and told that we are not independent, but interdependent of one another. And I think, like you said, that individualism, we think fear of loss. Again, am I going to lose who I am, being kind and loving and sharing who I am with others? So I'm just going to keep it to myself. And then you can, if you don't agree with it, then you're wrong. But we're interdependent of one another. In order to move forward in love, we have to know that we're dependent on one another. And so we intertwine and interweave with one another in order to make this life work. And it doesn't work through individualism. There has to be a community of some sort, that communal, like you said, scripture, I mean, those tribes, that was community. And so, yeah, we have to remember that interdependence is the key, connecting that chain and then moving forward. Will there be weakest links? Yes, there will be, because we don't all understand and agree the same. But the effort to link, the effort to be interdependent upon one another is what will help move all of that. And within that transformational love, we can all be transformed according to how God sees us. Community is communal.
Yeah, when you think of just Polish Judeo immigration, and it's clear in Scripture, where it comes to the stranger, the resident alien, the immigrant, that communally, when those people pass through villages and communities, the mindset was, we provide care for those people when they're here in our midst to the best we can. They're treated like one of our communities. And we are seeing the exact opposite of that happening as people are here trying to make a living and trying to find viability for their family systems. And we are doing everything we can to put up guardrails and divisions and boundaries, rather than how do we help people meet their basic needs of allowing them to thrive. We would want someone else to do the same for us, and we shouldn't let our power and privilege get in the way of all that stuff.
And then finding out that we need them.
That's right.
In order to survive.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, you're both going to make me talk about something I told myself I wasn't going to talk about, but you've done it. It's all your fault. One of the things for me, in the disciples' world, the doctrine of the Trinity is kind of a hit and miss thing. Even in the founders, there was one founder who was supportive of the doctrine of the Trinity, the other that was more of a Unitarianism. So anyway, the open Trinity was something that I discovered in seminary, and Moltmann was one of the theologians who really promoted that. But one of the things I really admire about his model of an open Trinity is, number one, just the model of the Trinity itself, and the fancy word they used to describe the relationship between the three beings of the Trinity, perichoresis, that making room for the other while allowing the uniqueness of each individual member of the Trinity. And by opening that up to us, then we are to practice that social nature of the Trinity in our own lives, making room for the other, and still respecting and even valuing and admiring the differences between us. And we've lost that ability. And and we don't talk about the Trinity much in church, in a lot of church settings at least. And I think it's maybe a mistake that we don't. But it's a hard concept for people to grasp. But yet we don't have to talk about whether we think it's realistic to think there are three beings that are one joined together, and how does that all work? And, is it essence, or, get into all those discussions.
And that goes back to my thinking about what I said earlier about the councils and creeds and all that kind of stuff, is the Western mindset was we have to figure it out.
Yeah.
The Eastern Christian mindset was it's this fluid relationship versus having it figured out versus knowing this is something that's not fully knowable, but we learn this kind of this interactive relational dynamic between the beings of what we would call the Trinity. So we don't have to have a known, like, this is what it is, but we know the outcome of Trinity is a relationship that's beyond our wildest imagination, that benefits us as a human person, human community, and the created order in of itself. I think that Eastern concept we've missed because we've so focused on the Western notions of Trinity in itself. But no, it's just
Opens up for opportunity.
Yeah.
The Trinity opens us up for opportunity.
Yeah.
Where do we fit? Where do we belong?
Yeah. While still establishing that relationship between all of us.
Yep.
yeah. I'm glad, Mark, you had to bring that up.
I promised myself I wasn't going to bring this up. I've been fighting with not saying anything about this for quite a while, and there you go. You've done it. So if we get a lot of feedback on that, it's your fault. I'm not taking the blame for it. The Apostle John claims that perfect love casts out all fear, and that addresses this reciprocal problem of hatred rooted in fear of the other that we talked about just a little bit ago. And drawing upon the understanding of God's extravagant love made flesh in Jesus, what are the specific and tangible ways that we can practice this extravagant love to break down the fear-based hostility between groups or individuals? I know that's a big loaded question there.
Something I teach and preach a lot. My congregation kind of pushes back, not pushes back, but like, again, Pastor, is forgiveness and understanding. Because we do and say things all the time that may be hurtful for some. And so when we are open to hearing and listening and giving space for forgiveness, if someone is hurt, if something is said that does not sit well, that's powerful for me, because then that gives that's like a second chance, if you will, when we offer forgiveness and when we extend forgiveness or giving forgiveness, that helps with, to me, radical love. It's just wild that you can forgive someone who has hurt you, and continue to be open to who they are and what they stand for, because we all make those mistakes. So listening and being open to forgiveness is the beginning for me when it comes to being on opposite sides or things that don't mesh well or go parallel to radical love. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
You mentioned forgiveness, and I led a book study here a few weeks ago, and one of the things this author talked about was that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation.
It does not.
And I think that's an important thing to know, is that we can forgive somebody and the relationship still be damaged, that we can't abide by the position that they hold, but we can still forgive them. Yeah. And I think that's a differentiation we've got to really consider in this world that we're in today.
And I think people do see that as, well, if I forgive them, I have to deal with them. I have to be, you do not. And then that brings back that forgiveness is for you. It really is. Because I've forgiven plenty of folk that I cannot interact with, speak with. I mean, it's just, I don't want to re-injure myself either. But I have to forgive them in order for me to feel forgiven, and also to continue to move in ministry in a healthy way. I can't hold on to unforgiveness and then try to teach and preach the good news in the gospel of Christ. So, reconciliation is not what you have to do just because you have forgiven someone. It doesn't always happen.
I think of MLK Jr.'s words about love and hate is that, when there's love out there, it's easy to respond with love when love's already there. Yeah. But when hate's out there, maybe your gut wants to respond in the same way they've responded to me. And MLK Jr. says, the response to hate isn't hate. The response to hate is love. Right. Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to remember in the Christian context is that, sometimes our gut's not our, intuition is maybe not the best thing, though that doesn't mean we don't trust intuition, but we have to be mindful of it's one thing to have emotions that arise and not any emotion that comes, should let come. And emotions are emotions, you don't want to suppress that stuff. But how we respond to those emotions becomes really critical. And that's the test, yeah. The other part I would say, in terms, you mentioned something about what are some tangible things, and I'm grateful for St. Andrew's piece in this, but a church entity has to be really careful. And I always think of it somewhat like a scale, when you're balancing a scale, that you don't tip the scale to being too insulated as a church, that it becomes more like a club than a manifestation of Jesus in the world. I mean, we sometimes have lost the notion the institution of the church is not an institution designed to sustain itself as an institution. We are simply to be representatives of Jesus in the world as a group of people, as an organism. And so we have to be careful that how we think about the program life and the things that the church does isn't about self-serving kinds of things. That doesn't mean we don't provide pastoral care when there's deaths or there's hospital needs or care needs or relationship, support to one another, all that stuff. But if we are tipping the scale to only that, we're leaning more to club mentality or some other organization. And the other side of the scale is engagement with the world and this reflecting of love in the world. And part of it is being present with people, continuing to show up in the community and being present, and not making the world look like us, but being present in the world and joining people in the journey and allowing love just be present in those kind of spaces. And so I think the church has to think about its life in terms of what are we doing, what we kind of historically think inside the walls of the church and outside the walls of the church. There should at least be this balanced scale, or even tipped toward the outside versus inside stuff, so that we're constantly being outward and reflecting. Because Jesus' ministry, he may have gone to a synagogue, may have gone to places, but 99% of his work was out in the world, not let's sit down and help each other out. Not that that wasn't part of it. It was way more than that. It was more outside stuff. So I think part of the tangible piece is a church to kind of do its own internal examine, and where do we expend our energy in terms of, if we love ourselves within Life Church, that's good, but it's really not where the destination of love is supposed to land. So,
well, that's where Jesus is frequently criticized for not being a club mentality, allowing people that were so diverse and so outside of the norms of the religious circle, and he just showed that to us over and over again. So yeah, I think you're right on that we've got to avoid at all costs that idea of a club mentality and break out into the world and demonstrate that love.
And the other piece is when we invite people out in the public square, is the challenge, well, I'm not necessarily comfortable with this or comfortable with that. And part of that's part of the wrestling with our Christian journey. It's that I don't think our destination is to feel comfortable. I think that's part of the work, is to work through the uncomfortableness, so that maybe the best version of love can find its way through.
Yeah.
We call that radical hospitality.
There you go.
Amen. Yep.
Just wild hospitality.
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
everybody,
Yep.
however we can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, to kind of close this out, knowing both of your congregations, I believe that you're both founded on this principle of transformational love. I've seen it practiced in both of your congregations, and it's a love that not only values but celebrates diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are all three have become dirty words in our culture in some places. The result is you've got a welcoming community of faith. And what are some ways that your congregations take that internal culture out into the world? And Chris, you talked about getting out of that, just keeping it within the walls, but what are some tangible ways that your congregations take that out into the world, and are there areas that you think you could be doing better at?
Yeah. Whosoever is a smaller congregation, and I was telling Chris before we started here, we've been doing this for 8 years. And because we are smaller and we've been doing it for 8 years, it's like this family, right? When new people come in, hey, that's great, wonderful, glad you're here. Not too many, because there's several reasons for that. And one of those reasons is the church hurt that has brought us together, and the fear. So kind of having sometimes a club mentality of this is us type of thing is what I have to remind the congregation that we cannot remain in. But I understand why. So I would like for us, whosoever, to be more open to trusting that God knows where we're headed, and not always holding or not continuing to hold on to the hurt and the harm. But what we do really well, which is crazy, what we do really well is bring in and envelop and embrace the community. But I think because it's on our terms, right? So when we serve or when we do different things in the community, if we're going there, okay, we can control this, and if we need to slip out, run out, we can do it. But when it's time to welcome people inside of what we have going on, it becomes a little more intimidating for us. What is your purpose? Why are you being so nice? What is this about? So we do really well with the radical hospitality. Let's, you're welcome here. We love you. Let's go serve. Let's do that. But if someone were to say, hey, how about we do this together? How about we bring you in? It becomes a little scary for us. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird for me to describe, but we love community interaction. We love serving the community. Maybe we're not so used to being served as a community, because then that means, do we have to let you in? Yeah. So I want whosoever to continue to be, we are now called whosoever believes. I want us to continue to believe that God has our best interest at heart. And when we open our hearts to the belief that we say we have in God, it will be okay. But we have to be willing to open that up a bit more. But I also want us to continue to serve and love on and invite and be hospitable to the community in which we reach out to. I hope any of that made sense. But it's kind of,
It's a complicated dance.
It is.
It
is.
St. Andrew was formed in 1991, and with that formation was one of the earliest churches. This is not meant to be like a look at us kind of, but just part of its understanding. But it was one of the earliest open and affirming congregations in the disciples movement in 1991, like one of the first 5 churches to do that. When that church made that declaration, its sense of justice around the LGBTQ plus community was a pretty significant statement at its time in 1991. And a big part of its identity was reimagining church maybe in ways that the church and disciples had not done, in more intentional kinds of ways. I arrived in May of 2020, in year 29 in the church's existence, an interesting time to arrive, and shared this more than once. Literally, I arrived May 18th. 1 week following my arrival, May 25th, George Floyd is murdered. And I thought my biggest challenge was going to be, how do I do church in COVID? Biggest challenge was, how do we respond to that murder in Minneapolis? And what does that say about the identity of us as a church? And our church wanted to respond, and I wanted to respond, but I also said, I don't want us to respond and then go back to what we were doing before, because that's a performative thing to do, especially as a predominantly white congregation, to go in and help and then go back and live as though life is the same. And so part of my brain was kind of along with not just me, but with leaders in the church, trying to think through what a response might mean in the moment, but in the days and years to come. And so in coming up with programmatic responses, we came up with a process of education, relationship building, and advocacy. And that everything we took on had a blend of those things, because as a church that's had power and privilege as a predominantly white church, we can step in and think we know the information or know how to fix the situation, and that was not our intention. And so doing a lot of self-education, not to do more damage in places in the community where there's already fear and feeling of safety or whatever it is. So we have that piece that's in there. So we have this little triad of a process of education, relationship building, because we step into places of injustice with our love as generations, hundreds of years of work that's been done in these justice areas. And we're just dipping our toe in the stream of justice.
Yeah.
And we're joining a long history of that's been going on, but we want to be a part of it, want to do so as intelligently and as carefully as possible to be an equal participant in that justice work. And the other thing I would say that we try to do is manage the two words that we use is mercy versus justice. And mercy being the word of helping people in the moment. And justice is addressing the systems that created the need for mercy in the first place. And the last few years, we've been more aggressively trying to deal with the more systemic issues that create the need for mercy. And I think that's continuing to be a growing edge for our church, is how do we be a part of system changing that really reflects the kind of beloved community that God dreamed for the world, and how do we be a part of that? Not neglecting continuing to show up in places of mercy. So if it's LGBTQ plus justice, if it's racial justice, if it's immigrant justice, if it's labor justice, if it's economic justice, and we've kind of dipped our toes in a lot of different areas, and not that we've got it all figured out, but there's clearly a lot of passion in the church, but making sure we step into places. I often talk about showing up, speaking up, and being present in places, and we need to be on the up and up, showing up, stepping up, speaking up, and sometimes that means us not doing anything but being present to others that are leading the way. We don't have to be the leaders. We just have to be a part of the movement to gain greater justice power by our presence and adding numbers to the work that's being done in those spaces. So.
Amen. Well, I'd like to thank both of you again. It's an honor for me to be sitting here with both of you, and may God bless you and your congregations and your ongoing ministry. And during the season of Advent, may you experience that transformational love, not only within, but from without your congregation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for whosoever believes being, recently in the large scope of time, connected to disciples. Yes. Just so glad your congregation is connected to this, blend of congregations doing this work together, because it takes all of us to do this stuff. So I'm just so grateful for the work you're doing, and whosoever believes, and just knowing that one church doesn't have it figured out, that we all collectively are doing our pieces in this justice, mercy work, trying to show love in the world. So thank you for what you're doing.
And we appreciate the connection, the opportunity, and the invitation. It's helped us and changed us tremendously to feel connected, to feel a part of something. And the DOC has stepped up and shown us just how important the work is, and that we're included. So yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, go and do good and seek justice.
Seek justice.
Amen.
Amen.